February 1959. Deep in the frozen wilderness of the Ural Mountains in the Soviet Union, 9 experienced hikers vanished without a trace. Weeks later, rescuers finally discovered their campsite. What they found made no sense. The hikers' tent had been slashed open from the inside. Their footprints led away from the camp into a brutal snowstorm. Some were barefoot, some wore only socks. All of them had fled into temperatures below -30 degrees Celsius. But the most disturbing discovery came later, when the bodies were finally recovered. Because the autopsies revealed injuries so strange that even investigators struggled to explain them. The group was led by Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old engineering student. All 9 hikers were highly experienced members of the Ural Polytechnical Institute hiking club. Their goal was to reach a remote mountain in the northern Ural range called Autopsies Mountain. But during the journey, the group stopped to camp on the slope of a nearby peak known as Kholat Syakhl. In the language of the local Mansi people, the name means something chilling: Mountain of the Dead. On the night of February 1st, something happened inside that tent. Something terrifying enough to force 9 experienced hikers to tear their way out and run blindly into the freezing darkness. When the group failed to return on schedule, search teams were sent into the mountains. For days, rescuers battled deep snow and violent winds. Finally, they located the campsite. The tent was partially buried in snow. Inside were the hikers' belongings: boots, clothing, food supplies, everything they would need to survive the cold. But the hikers themselves were gone. Then investigators noticed something strange. The fabric of the tent had been cut open from the inside. Whoever was inside had escaped in a hurry, and whatever they were escaping from had terrified them enough to abandon everything. Not far from the campsite, searchers discovered footprints in the snow, 9 sets of tracks, all leading downhill toward a nearby forest. The prints suggested something odd. The hikers had walked, not run, but they were barefoot or wearing only socks. Nearly a mile away, beneath a tall pine tree, the first 2 bodies were found. They had tried to start a fire. Their hands were burned. The bark of the tree above them had been torn away, as if someone had desperately climbed it. But it wasn't until the autopsies began that the true mystery started to emerge. At first, investigators believed the hikers died from hypothermia, but the injuries told a different story. Several victims showed severe internal trauma. One had a fractured skull. Another had crushed ribs so severe that doctors compared them to injuries seen in a high-speed car crash. Yet strangely, there were almost no external wounds, no deep cuts, no bruises, nothing that would normally accompany such devastating injuries. The medical examiner later reported that the force responsible must have been extremely powerful, but no clear source of that force was ever found. Months later, when the snow finally began to melt, search teams discovered the last 4 hikers buried beneath several feet of ice and snow. What they found shocked investigators. One victim was missing her tongue. Parts of her lips and eyes were also gone. Some experts suggested the damage occurred after death, possibly caused by natural decomposition or scavenging animals. But the circumstances still raised disturbing questions, because the injuries seen in the autopsies didn't resemble anything investigators had encountered before. Then came another unsettling discovery. Tests revealed that some of the hikers' clothing showed traces of radiation. The source of the radiation was never fully explained. Adding to the mystery, several witnesses from nearby villages reported seeing strange orange lights in the sky on the night the hikers disappeared,
lights that drifted silently above the mountains. To some investigators, these sightings raised the possibility of secret military activity in the area, but no official confirmation was ever given. The Soviet investigation eventually reached a conclusion, or at least something close to one. The report stated that the hikers died due to an unknown compelling force, and with that vague explanation, the case was closed. But for decades afterward, researchers, scientists, and amateur investigators continued to study the evidence, because many believed the truth had never been fully revealed. In recent years, scientists proposed a possible explanation. A rare type of slab avalanche may have struck the campsite during the night. The shifting snow could have terrified the hikers and forced them to cut open the tent to escape quickly. Fearing a larger avalanche, they may have moved downhill toward the forest for safety. This theory could explain why the hikers left their shelter so suddenly. It might even explain the crushing internal injuries. But it still leaves many unanswered questions. Why was there radiation on some clothing? Why did some hikers suffer such unusual trauma? And why did they remain so far from the tent instead of returning once the danger had passed? More than 60 years later, the mystery of the Dyatlov Pass Incident continues to haunt investigators. 9 hikers, 1 frozen mountain, and a night filled with events that still defy explanation. Perhaps it was a tragic accident caused by the brutal power of nature. Or perhaps something else happened on that mountain, something we still don't fully understand. Because whatever forced those hikers out of their tent that night terrified them enough to run straight into the deadly cold. And somewhere in the silent, frozen wilderness of the Ural Mountains, the truth about Dyatlov Pass may still be buried beneath the snow. What do you think really happened on that mountain in 1959? Was it an avalanche, a secret experiment, or something far more mysterious? Share your theory in the comments, because sometimes the greatest mysteries in history are the ones that refuse to remain buried.